was looking at assessment and then next steps, and I'll explain the reasoning behind those two. Assessment in particular came through from the feedback from the first session, so we did one for the Southwest just a couple of weeks ago, and it really looked at the kind of experiences of online learning and teaching, and how that might look by design, with some practical examples there that were hopefully useful. On that feedback form, there were quite a few comments around assessment, and it's something that I've been hearing fed back to me again in national sessions as well that I've been delivering. So what we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, and what we'll hopefully do as we go through this session is have a real consideration about assessment, where it fits in with remote or online learning, and as well I think we've had some really good news recently. So it's obviously not it's not perfect news, but we've had positive news, and I believe we're making positive steps towards a return to physical educational settings. So again, how do we take forward what we've learned in the past year, particularly around assessment in this instance, and how do we develop that to support our learning and teaching in our assessment, or judgments, or moderation, or feedback as we go forward and what's left of this school year and into next year. And again, following up from that with the news that we've had recently, I think it's perhaps time, certainly not saying that everyone has to really get going with next steps, but I'm sure many people had great ambitions for this school year previously, that have been perhaps put on hold or slowed down because of the international pandemic. So whether you're returning to steps that you had hoped to take over the past year and really want to get into gear with that, or the past year has taught us all lots of lessons and perhaps you feel that you want to make changes, and really the amount of work, the amount of energy that the educators have put into upskilling and developing firstly their knowledge and understanding of digital tools and platforms, but also how they've applied that to increase the educational engagement and attainment for the learners. So how do we capture that and make sure that it's there as we go forward, and it's not something that we put back on the shelf perhaps because we can get back to our old routines that we had in our physical establishment. So how are we going to embrace digital and take it forward with us? So we want to have a wee bit of chat around that, and again, as ever, I don't have all of the answers. I've hopefully got some answers, but what I'd like to do is get a bit of discussion going around that and some ideas shared. And again, it's either reassuring to see other people are on the same page as you, or other people are going to share really exciting and fresh ideas that you haven't perhaps thought of. And it's great to come along to sessions like this and borrow other people's ideas. So that's what I'm hoping to get through in this session. I'm going to play very quickly. I don't really like to use video content in these. I usually think if you want to watch these, you can go and find them, but I think this one's especially useful. So I've put this short video just from Dylan Williams. You've probably already seen it. It's hosted on the Education Scotland site as well. It's probably quite a popular clip, but I think it's really important to get that definition about formative assessment, and I particularly like where he describes it as being a bit like a plane journey. So I'll leave it to Dylan William to explain just about assessment and make sure we're all coming from the same definition or the same ideas around that.
To me, formative assessment describes all those processes by which teachers and learners use information about student achievement to make adjustments to the student's learning that improve their achievement. So it's about using the information to adapt your teaching and adapt the work of the students to put the learning back on track, if you like, to make sure that the learning is proceeding in the right direction and to support that learning. So it's what happens when you don't just lecture students and rattle through the material until you get to the end and ask them if they've understood it okay. It's constantly making those adjustments. One of the ways I like to talk about it is just imagine what would happen if a pilot flew like many teachers assess. So I flew back from Seattle a few weeks ago, Just imagine what the pilot would have done. He would have flown east for 9 hours, and then after 9 hours he'd say it's time to land. So he'll put the plane down and he'll ask, is this London? And of course, even if it's not London, he says, well, everybody's got to get off because I've got to get onto the next journey. And that's exactly the way that we've assessed in the past. We teach students material, and at the end of that teaching, we find out if they've learned it or not. And if they haven't, we say, too bad, because we're on to the next unit. So what formative assessment does is encourages teachers to take constant readings about where students are, just in the same way that a pilot takes constant readings about their position. And if the learning isn't proceeding as you'd planned, then you make adjustments. That's the essence, to me, of formative assessment. So the reason...
So going from that idea, which I'm sure that we all have in our practice of constantly checking and making adjustments to learners' needs and the next steps, and hopefully take them towards improved attainment, there could be, I could see where people might come to remote learning or digital learning and teaching and think, I need new assessment strategies because I'm using a new platform or a new device, it's a new process. I've seen lots of discussion around digital pedagogies, and yet ironically I guess the digital learning and teaching team that I'm a part of, we don't see it as being really very different. The platforms, the tools that you're using are perhaps different, perhaps new to you, but all of our work that we've shared over the past year, and which is backed up, you see some of the reports here from IKEA, I always say IKEA and think the furniture shop, or the EEF or Dillon William, but they're telling us that good learning and teaching is good learning and teaching. It doesn't matter the mode that it is presented or delivered through. It doesn't matter if it's synchronous or asynchronous or live or flipped or whatever language you use around that. It doesn't matter if you use Teams or Classroom or if you post them paper and pencils out via the Royal Mail. If the learning and teaching is of a good enough quality and there is effective assessment there, we'll engage learners and we'll be able to make the most of the time that we have with our learners, whether it's live or connected or blended or flipped or however that takes place. And so again, assessment for me sits within that learning that we do, and I believe in fact that digital tools allow us to make formative assessment even more streamlined, and I'm going to go through some examples of that further on in this presentation. I'll show you some examples of where that fits. So with these main points on the screen here, you can see they're all saying the same thing. The three in the middle that I've kind of grouped together, if you look at the spacing, are all from the EEF, and the Education Endowment Foundation's research about assessing and monitoring pupil progress. And the one about dependable claims, I'm going to talk to a particular tool, I suppose any tool, and again that's one of the advantages of digital, that we can capture the evidence and it can be shared, duplicated and replicated really easily. So again, if I've got a really good example of a piece of writing and it's done digitally, it's much easier for me. With the press of a button, I can share that with whoever it needs to be shared with, whether that's a member of management or if I have to share that with the pupil or home to their families, I can do it with one or two clicks of a button. Whereas again, when I was still in school, there were perhaps, I was on the cusp of these tools, but there was still a lot of photocopying and taking photographs of learners and putting photographs, gluing it into jotters and then writing on it. And those seem really archaic now with the when you see the way that people are working just now digitally. So the fact that we can constantly look and see, if you're using a tool like OneNote and Teams, you can be looking at your learner's page as they typed it. So again, if you want to think about formative assessment, you can watch the learner as they write on the page, and you can do that with a number of learners at once, and you can give them feedback at any point in that process with the tools that you have. So I really see the formative assessment as being embedded. It's not another thing, it's not a new strategy, it's not another strand, it's just a part of the way that we could and should work with digital tools online. And again, I keep saying, come with some examples and I will show you a few in a wee second. And I also think there's another wee strand that we've been developing in our team. My colleague Louise Foreman's really led that, around metacognition. And again, it's one of those ones I kind of feel when you look at the reading around metacognition, you think, well, that's what I do. And it's what we should be doing. But again, sometimes when you go back and you read it, it really refreshes it and puts it back to the front of your mind, and you can make those wee adjustments to your own practice as well to make sure that your learners are leading the learning. And in order to, as Dylan Williams says there, activate students as owners of the learning, which is a huge part of the meta skills, then they need that feedback on their assessment, they need their learning to be assessed, and they need feedback. Without that, how can they possibly take next steps? How can they lead the learning? How can they know what they've learned if it's not fed back to them in a timely manner and the feedback doesn't relate to the learning? So if you mark that maths assessment a week later, your learner has moved on, and I often wonder the same about homework, where if you do your homework on a Monday night and it gets handed in on a Friday and it gets marked and given back to you on the Monday, that's a week between you doing it. And I know that as an educator, you can't control when they do that whole thing, if you give them it for a week. But again, if my learner did it on Thursday and I'm giving it back to them on Friday afternoon or Monday when I've marked it, then it's more relevant. But if they've done it on Monday night, and that might be the way they choose to work because of their scheduling, whereas if I'm doing it digitally, I'm not dependent on them handing in a jotter. I can just look at their tasks that they've got online. So again, coming back always to the moderation cycle, and again, there's no new bit to that. There's nothing new to add about digital. The one bit I would usually say is, again, like every other educator, I'm starting with the learner. What's the learner's needs? And then I'm planning through the E's and O's, learning intentions. And it's at that point when I start to think about my delivery. How am I going to teach this? That's where digital comes in, certainly for me. I don't start with digital E's and O's, the technology, experiences and outcomes. I'm not starting with those to meet them unless I'm teaching, say, computing science or cyber resilience or particular digital literacy skills. I might well start there if that's the learner's needs. But if I'm using digital across the curriculum and I'm teaching some literacy, for example, I'm starting again with the learner, the experiences and outcomes, and digital comes in around here, and it's only if it's applicable. I don't have a digital answer for every possible lesson you could want to teach, and that's okay. There isn't always a digital answer, and some of the things that you may have, I've seen some fantastically creative and resourceful methods of delivering curriculum areas digitally and remotely over the past year, and it's incredible to see how people have responded to that, the talents on show. But again, if you're unable to teach, let's say, a piano lesson, then it might be a case of having to put that piano lesson on pause until you can get the learner to a piano, and that might be a difficult decision to make. But again, some things might not be suitable to digital, and that's okay. So we plan it to do it different ways, and if we can't do it remotely with digital, then maybe that is something that goes on hold. I can imagine lots of sports clubs have been put on hold for the year, and that's unfortunate. But again, you could probably do some football practice via Zoom or Teams or Skype, but it's not going to replicate what a football game or football training or football club would actually be like. So some things have been on hold, and that is unfortunate. Digital doesn't have the answer to everything, but where it is, certainly I'd say going through again about, we know that digital activities and platforms and devices engage learners. Sometimes it's just new and fresh enough. Sometimes it's because it relates to things that they do in their own life, their own cultural capital. They use devices and platforms online all the time for their own social life, so why not use it for their learning? So we know it engages them. I'm going to show you some examples, particularly around the evidence. And again, we can then use that to come through. If we've got the good evidence, again, it's easy enough to share that, make evaluations and judgments on that. And it comes back to, again, feedback to pupils, the digital tools, and make that even easier for us and a quicker turnaround. And I'll show you those examples as we go through. The first part then, I want to talk about in practical terms, is the use of assignments. And I'm sure many people are already using their assignments through probably Teams for most of yourselves, unless I know North Ayrshire have access to Google Classroom. So whether it's Teams or Classroom, I would hope that most people are using assignments. to distribute learning to the learners, because it puts everything in one place. You've got a space on an assignment, and I'll just show you an example one in a wee second. You can put all your instructions, learning intentions, everything in there's a space for that on assignments. You can attach a rubric, and I don't really like the language of rubric. It sounds very American or university level, but it lets you attach a marking guide, and I think it's really important to be transparent to your learner, and indeed if they're showing that learning to a member of their family and saying, this is what I've got to do, Dad, this is what I'm working on, Gran, whoever that is that's supporting them, that they can, whoever's supporting them with the learning as well is able to look at that with the learner and see what the expectation is. What is the difference between good, excellent, and this needs support? What are the differences between those bands of feedback? And that might be a language you use regularly as an educator, but it's maybe not something that families hear. So again, with the rubric, you can explain why they're getting that particular level of feedback on the rubric. You can add your reference materials, so again, things that they need for reading to support the activity, whether that's videos. Again, you can add documents that are view only, so you can add a Microsoft Word document, and learners can only read it, so they can't edit that and manipulate it for anyone else. And then you can, even within assignments, create a task attached to it, and I think that's really important to go under the student work part. In my classroom, if I want my learners to write a bit of paper, it's my job, my responsibility to give them a bit of paper. I don't expect them to go and look for bits of paper. If I want them to do it in a jotter or a workbook, I give them that. I don't expect them to go and find it. Now, you might feel that Microsoft Word is right there. It's no difficult or challenging to find within Teams, but it's about those high expectations that I had in my classroom and I'm carrying on to my virtual classroom. So if I want my learner to write on a OneNote, I attach a OneNote to the assignment for them. I attach the OneNote I want them to write on. I'm not expecting them to go away and find it. It also means, in terms of marking through the assignment and giving that feedback, that I have all of their OneNotes in the same place. They're not sharing it in files or email, and I don't have to go into Teams and look through the professional or the class notebook to find their page. I'm giving them the page I want them to write on, and that's the page that they hand in, and it's the page that I assess and feed back on. So I'm going to just go through assignments, and I'll show you an example of assignments. And again, feel free to pop anything into the chat just now, just as we go. If there's anything you want me to talk about, particularly if I'm going through assignments and I miss anything out, let me know and we can come back to that. Or again, if you've got any examples of that, or you want to add anything or ask anything about assignments, pop it into the chat and I'll have a wee look as I come back through. So this is my team here, and if I go to the assignments tab, I can create a new assignment. What's really useful there, in fact, if I go back one, as you'll see, I also have the option to create from existing. So if I've already created a class, an assignment for my second years, the chances are I can maybe reuse some of that for my first years and change some of the materials or some of the wording. Or again, if I'm working with one first year class, then I could probably share this to another first year class as well and edit it and make it appropriate as required. But if I'm creating a new assignment, I've got my title, well worth adding tags to that, so especially if you're working in different curricular areas, or if you know your learners are, so maybe not so much at secondary, if you've got your own classes on Teams, you know, if you're the computing teacher and they're in your computing team, then they would expect to find their computing learning in there. But I think under the assignments tab, it's still useful for them to have them tagged. Certainly if you're a primary teacher, worth tagging it as maths or writing it so that they know what they're accessing. So let's imagine it was a bit of maths. You call it maths demo. Here's where I would make sure, again, that excellent standard that I have in my classroom about learning intention, success criteria. I could even ask some questions as part of that to make sure that my learners are, you know, the right challenge questions to go with it. Clear, concise instructions. And I know you might think, I'm already attaching a video explaining how to do this. But again, you think about the digital equity and data poverty and the challenge that poses to some people. It might be enough to use their mobile data to access this, and sometimes they just need it written on the screen. They don't need to have a video because that's using up data all the time. What you'll also see is anything that you type in your assignment learners can have it read to them with the built-in immersive reader tool. So if you type the instructions good and clear here, they can have it read to them aloud. So again, if they have a support need like dyslexia or visual impairment or visual stress or anything like that, then the immersive reader tool really comes into its own. I can add resources here, and again, really useful. As I say, in a digital thing, I can reuse without having to remake everything. So I can come into here and I can take any other files I've already got. So if I get a PowerPoint, like today's PowerPoint, here it is. I can add today's PowerPoint. This is what I want the learner to look at, and I can attach that to the assignment for them to have a look at. It'll take a wee minute to load. I can then go back in. I can add links to a website. So if I've got let's say something on youtube.com, I could give them the exact YouTube video there if that was something they could access, or BBC Bite Size. So again, you don't have to make all of the materials. If you've got a BBC Bite Size, let's just see if I can get one. What is the World Wide Web? There we go, there's one I've looked at recently, so I must have been doing it for lesson planning activities. I'm going to paste that web address in, and there it is for my learners. Again, I'm not putting it in posts, I'm not putting it in files, I'm not asking them to go and find things. This is the resource I want you to look at. Here it is. It's with everything you need. And again, if I've added the bits I need. If I need to create a new file, I can create a new one here as well. So if I need a new Word document just for this activity, I can add from here. And I can also upload from my device if I've already got something there as well. With the resources over here at the ellipsis, I can give it so that students can edit their own copy, which is great for assessment. I want them to have their own copy. But in this case, I'm setting it as students can't edit. I want them to read this, but I don't want them changing my presentation. So again, that's really useful for course notes and things like that. I want them to read it, but I don't want them to edit it. I don't want them deleting a slide from my presentation by accident and then other people miss out on that information. So you can control that here. I'm not going to assign points because I'm working to assessment for learning. And I can add a rubric instead, and I think the rubrics are really valuable. I'm going to show you again the fact that I can reuse one I've already got. So if this is a unit of work and I keep coming back to this, then this place value rubric, I could use this across, let's say we're learning about place value for 2 or 3 weeks, developing our understanding and knowledge of that. It might be something I come back and I'm going back to the same core skills each time about identifying the place value of the numeral. I might reuse that. I might have to add a new one in, and I just need to press the add button at the bottom, and I might need to delete one, and I can just use the wee bin. I might take one here, as you can see. I might want to use something very similar to that, and I might be using the same criteria, the same banding, and I'm just going to copy it, and I can change the wording as required. It's not an Education Scotland thing or anything particular around assessment and feedback. Those are just terms that I would perhaps use with my learners. So, and it might be that I need to just reorder some of those. I might just want to have actually keep going, getting there, and you've got this, so they're in an order. It's just the way I've added them there, that they're in a slightly different order than I would have liked them. I'm not going to bother moving them about just now. So I can copy, I can delete, I can edit. So I could start with something useful. You can turn points on. I've got points turned off. I just don't like that. I don't want them to come in and go, I get 9 out of 10. I want them to read the marks and the feedback there. And what's really good is, if I'll show you in a wee second, the student, I'll show you the student view. But again, my learner can look at that before they even start the task and go, right, I know what the teacher's expecting of me. You know, I think I've got this, so all my examples need to be correct. There's not a tool as of yet from Microsoft for the learner to tick it and say that's my self-assessment, but you could even ask the learner, how do you think you've done with this task? You put that on the instructions, you can put that on a form or put it as part of the OneNote they're using, the Word document, whatever it is, but your learner could use that and talk to that language as well. I can set a due date. I would always suggest that we don't set it for the weekend and say Friday at 12, because some learners might take that as a cue to work until I've got until 12 o'clock to do that. It might sound dead obvious, but I'd be setting that for about 4 o'clock. Look, I don't want you working past 4 o'clock on Friday, so you've got until Friday 4 o'clock to hand it in. I'm not looking for you to hand it in at 9 at night. So I can then assign that to my learners. Let's go back and edit it. And what I forgot to add is the sheet for them to work on. So what I'm going to add here is I want them to do this on a OneNote notebook. So let's call it Maths Demo, and I think I'll call it 5 because I think I've done a few Maths Demo pages already. So I can give this sheet a name. I want that to go into numeracy in Maths, and in the student section, so this will automatically go to each student's notebook section. I want it to go into their My Notes section. So I've created a copy for each learner, and you can see it's automatically set to edit their own copy. So I want the learners to have their own copy of that notebook. Now you can pre-make a notebook and you can add bits to it. You can, I've had some difficulties. I think if I edit it here, it should still edit it for the learners, but I've had some issues around that where I've updated it here and it hasn't updated to the people that I've distributed it to. So I've updated that. The learners will get a wee notification saying that that task has been changed. What I've got then is the student view mode, and I can look and see what my students see. So this is what my student gets. They would have their instructions, the learning intentions there. They've got the rubric to support the success criteria. You might want to put that one or other rather than both places. Again, my learner can look at that and see what I am marking them to. That's clear and transparent. I've got the reference materials. They can open them up and have a look, and then when they open up their OneNote, they can edit that and they can show me their thinking, their understanding. I've used OneNote because it's a really flexible tool, and I'll talk again to OneNote in a wee second. Immersive Reader, I can have that read to me.
Maths Demo. Category, Maths.
There's some settings that I can change about who reads that, male or female, the speed. I've got some options around the way that the text appears on my screen. This might be useful for learners with EAL or families that are ESOL. So I can have it read to me in another language or just one word at a time. I can have translated to a word. You can see it's showing me a wee picture to represent this is what maths means. I wonder if I can get an image for another word. Nothing much there. It won't show me a picture for February. So again, for maths, it's showing me a wee picture, which it will do for certain words if it has a picture installed there. I can also change the background colour, the space and the size of the text, etc. So it's suitable to each individual learner. And when I leave Immersive Reader, that all goes away. So it's just there. It's a wee tool built in, really useful. But having that assignment done means that I'm making clear my expectations to my learners. And then my learner, when they've done the learning and I give them back the assessment, I can do that in a few ways. If I show you grades very quickly, I can see some comments coming into the chat, so I'm just going to come back and see those in a wee second. But if I open up for grades here, that's not loaded right there. There it goes. So I've gone into grades. Here's my maths demo that I've just handed out. I want to have a look at Jacqueline's work and see how she's got on with this. And she's not written anything in it yet. So I could leave her some feedback on the actual document. I can give her feedback over here. I can use the rubric to give her feedback and say, there's a few errors. In fact, you've not written anything. Or if it's more positive, yep, all examples are correct. That's great. And I always think of the rubric and these wee feedback buttons a bit like stamping feedback onto learners. It's those ones that we're generally using, maybe relating to the success criteria. But I always think there's that extra value that's so important about assessment and feedback that we give them that specific feedback. So, yep, this is based on their ability to use manipulatives and show me their example. But here's where I give them the feedback that is unique to that learner. So again, I've got my generic and I've got my specific feedback as well. And I can send that to Jacqueline and say, there's your feedback. I've added some comments and given her learning back to her, but I want her to go and make some improvements to that and improving upon it. So again, really useful for me is the teacher to be able to look at this and say, I can see there's all the assignments I've handed out to this class. I can go through it learner by learner and I can see, if I just show you with an assignment we've done. have a look at Julie's. I'm sure I added something to Julie's here. We can have a look and see, there's Julie's learning on her OneNote. So again, it's about maths, numeracy and maths here. We'll talk about place value. I've asked her to use an external resource called MathSpot to take some images of virtual manipulatives. So a kind of pictorial representation of her understanding. And she can put this here into OneNote and I can see what she's thinking. So it's not just like asking a quiz or asking her to type words on the screen. She can actually share a picture with me, and it's, as you'd imagine, it's not going to load for me just now. So what I'll do is I'll check the comments and see if this picture loads on the OneNote just while we are going through it. So a couple of comments here. Sorry, Miss Hare, I'll share the slides at the end of this with some examples on them. Mrs. Lawson, I hope I've now covered that about Immersive Reader. What it does is it's built into a lot of the Microsoft functions, so OneNote, Teams, Word, I think it's now in PowerPoint as well, and it will read text that's on the screen within that Microsoft app, so it's really powerful for learners to be able to see it. I can see, sorry, Miss Hare's answered that, so thanks, Kirsty. So Mr. Gould is saying about you found that really useful, marking longer pieces of work, yeah. And in fact, two of the ones that I did, Mr. Guhuli, about that was the last class I taught were a P6, and we did some creative writing based on the awful anti-stories, and what I wanted them to show me was that they could describe characters and settings through their use of adjectives and adverbs to describe appearances and actions. And what they were able to do with Immersive Reader was turn on the text marking tools, the grammar tools, and it could highlight if they had adjectives and adverbs, and they can highlight those in different colours. And that was great because rather than coming and tugging on the edge of my shirt to ask me if I could check if they had adjectives, they were able to do that. So again, we come back to pupil agency. They can check that grammar and punctuation themselves. They've got that tool in front of them. And then later in the year, when we did some report writing about the Scottish Parliament, and we're writing some factual reports around that, they were able to use it again and check for embellishment. So we don't want words like brilliant and amazing and awesome in that factual report. I want them to keep it literal, and they were able to use the Immersive Reader again to check if the language was appropriate. So that might be useful for whether it's in English or even, as I say, report writing. That might be social subjects or sciences as well could use that. So it's a great tool, and it's well worth exploring. My image still hasn't loaded here. You have to just trust me. In fact, I think I've got a version on the slides. So what I would hope to see on Julie's notebook is something like this. Those are using the MathSpot examples, just because it's a numeracy and maths example. MathSpot like use these virtual manipulatives to create representations, whether it's using the Dean's material, a counting stick, a number line. So a learner can add all these images because it's on a OneNote. You can add images as easily as you can add text, and that means again you get a much rounder insight into the learner's thinking than just having words. You can ask them to show pictures, to draw illustrations, and again with OneNote, I'm aware it's just not going to load that image for me. That's really frustrating. What I can do is I can type text, etc, etc here. I can use the dictate button, etc, 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 full stop, new line. This is a demonstration of how the Microsoft Dictate function can listen to me talk and then type the words on the screen for me, full stop. Imagine that you were a learner who was dyslexic, for example, and how this might change their ability to create a text by writing on the screen. Or imagine being a teacher or educator and having to write lots and lots of feedback or reports, or having to generate a new text for your learners. And you can see I'm speaking at quite a pace. It's keeping up pretty accurately. Full stop, new line. And I can even give it the grammatical instructions like full stop, new line. There's probably a couple of errors in there. I want to go back and proofread. You can see it's even capitalised the I. So that's a really useful tool. But again, for assessment purposes, what's great, I really like the insert and audio button. And this tool will just listen to me through my device's built-in microphone, so almost any laptop every mobile device has got a microphone, and I can tell you what I think, how I arrived at that conclusion, and the fact that I used perhaps 2 10s and 3 1s from the Dean's blocks to represent the number 23, or I could have used 23 1s to represent that number. But I can explain my thinking to you. And as an educator, you can listen to that audio recording that your learner has done so they can speak verbally and explain their thinking. Or you could have a conversation here. This could be you leaving feedback for your learner with the insert and an audio recording. And again, I'll ask you, how many times have you ever said to a learner, what did I tell you last week? And your learner's all of a sudden going, let me think, what did I have for dinner last night? What did I do yesterday? Let's get back to last week. The beauty with this is if you give them verbal feedback, they can go back and listen to it. You can say, what did I tell you in August? And they can go back to August in their OneNote and they can listen to that feedback here on the screen. So I think those are really powerful tools, and I said about the assessment being built in. The reason I've created the example with the OneNote is because all these tools are built in and I can use them for assessment, I can use them for feedback as I go. I'm hoping this is just going to refresh and it will show you the image it's supposed to see. And again, there are tools built into this OneNote, such as Draw. So if I've got a touchscreen device, I can just use my finger on the screen. I've seen lots of people talk about buying graphics tablets to do that. Let's see if it will open up Helen's this time instead. But even just with my mouse, I can still draw upon the screen. So if they've put an image in for their learning, and again, they can insert an image from their device, so they can insert an image from the web, or they can use their mobile phone. They could do their numeracy offline, away from their screen. They could be done on a bit of paper, it could be done on a chalkboard, it could be done in a sandpit, and they write their calculations, whatever they want to do. They could do it with manipulatives, and they could take a photograph of it and upload that as their answer using OneNote and the camera built into their device. And just about every mobile device has got a camera, and even my laptop's got a camera built in as well. We'll use the web camera to do that. So just about unless they've got a desktop PC, they'll be able to upload an image from their device, and you can then, once they've added that in, you can draw upon it. And I'm just using my mouse, so I could say, you know, tick. I could, this bit here needs a wee bit of focus. Can we have a look at this so I can really draw their eye to the bit that I want them to focus on? And again, I could put in a worked example. Not ideal if I am doing it with my mouse, but hopefully my mouse writing skills are eligible enough, and I could talk about how we're adding, let's start the tens. So I'm going to add my tens together, and I'm going to add my units. So I could actually give them a worked example here as well, and that might be part of the feedback. So remember, this is the strategy we were speaking about, and the fact that I can then model that on the screen. So I could put that on their learning, on their evidence, just like you might do in the class. And I've not to sift through papers and jotters and things to do that. It's all there for me. I can give them this, I can attach a bit of verbal feedback to go with that. That's why I'm talking to this tool in particular, because I think it's so easy to provide feedback as you go. And then I can send that back to Helen. Helen will get a wee notification. Hopefully she's not in a meeting just now, but she'll get a wee notification saying I've marked her maths learning there. Come back and see if there's anything into the chat here. Not just Mr. Lawson said good tip. Yeah, you're welcome. So going back to the slides, that's the wrong screen. Yeah, so those are, that's an example. Another one that I've done here, now this is off of a Google tool called Jamboard, which works very similar to OneNote, except OneNote doesn't have post-it notes. I'm sure somebody's been in touch. Kirsty, I presume you've maybe been in touch with Mike Tholson already to request this. It would be great if OneNote had post-it notes as well. It's one of my favourite features of Jamboard, so if you're a North Ayrshire using Google, Jamboard's well worth a look. Just, you could get learners on OneNote to do it with different text boxes or put a table in, or however you want to get them to do that. There's different tools for that, but I find the post-its are really effective. And again, it's just a Jamboard shared to a class. And again, you can do that with OneNote, you can share it to a class, and here's all of their understanding. So if I'm looking at this, I can look here and see, here's some puzzles, here's some questions my learners have about the film that we watched for literacy. How did the baboon get in the moon? That was Emily that asked that. Michaela's asking about why does he stay by himself. So have Michaela and Emily engaged with this activity? I would say so. I could provide them their own Jamboards, and I might ask them a wee extension questionnaire to say, well, you have a guess about that. What do you hypothesise has happened? If we're talking about looking at the events here, so some literal things, what happened in the story? This learner, Brooke, has explained to me, she's summarised the story there, the events, she's identified the main events in the story. Great work, Brooke, and that's easy to feed back on. So it's really easy to get my learners to show me their thinking, and then I can add my post-it notes, or I can draw on this with the pen tool. But that's just some examples of what your literacy and your numeracy might look like, and the reason that I'm promoting that use of OneNote tool, because it lets me capture all those different types in there. So, I want to move on, that's the assignments part. What I want to just jump through, and I've put examples and links to videos. You'll see some videos linked through here on the slides. They're hidden. I'm not going to go through them in this presentation, but they're there. Hopefully we've covered all that, and you can see assignments let me put everything in one place, and I can then go back to that one place for assessment or for the activity. I can then go back to it for the assessment, and I can use it in the same place for the feedback. And if I need any examples from that, I can take a screenshot quite simply. So that's just a screenshot using the Microsoft snipping tool built into my laptop, part of Windows. I can just take a screenshot of this and say there's my evidence. So that's really useful there. I've talked to these points from the EEF. I've talked to in terms of forms now. I'm sure you'll see from the example of OneNote there that my reliability of my assessment I can see. So rather than a bit of work in their jotter, that learner might well have that thinking in their head and they're just not getting it in their jotter or their bit of paper. And you might argue that they might just not get it on their OneNote either. But we know digital platforms, digital tools engage learners. OneNote lets them type with their voice. It lets them record a voice recording of their thoughts. It lets them upload a picture, so they could go outside and they could make some graphs with sticks, take a photograph of that and upload that. So it lets us be really creative, and it gives us a place to share that thinking. So it's more likely to engage them than just sending them, say, a worksheet or a photocopy or a screenshot or a textbook or a task that's very generic. You can give them that pupil agency and say, I want you to make a graph. They might go and use Excel, they might draw it on a bit of paper, they might make it, as I say, with sticks and stones. Whatever they want to do, they can respond to that quite creatively, and they can share it here. So it's useful for engagement. It also develops that reliability, because I can ask them, again, in one OneNote document, I can ask them to show me a picture, to write it, and to draw it, and to record their thinking with their voice. So I can ask them to show me 4 or 5 different modes of how they've explaining their understanding. Again, if I'm making that judgment, this is only a part of the picture. So this might be a part, so I'm looking at that going, yeah, they get their 2-digit number, they understand what the number 37 is and about the units and the tens, the ones and the tens that make up that number. They can represent it in a number of different ways. I could also ask them to use something like a Microsoft form, which is quite useful, a quiz quite useful for certainly diagnostic kind of tools, and I'll show you a wee example of that in a second as well. I think forms, I'm speaking particularly to the reliability and the accuracy, because there is a part, and the EEF speaks about that. If this is Fiona's learning, and I know Fiona engages, I know Fiona is good, and with the best will in the world, I shouldn't make any bias on that. But if I know it's Fiona's, I can look at that and say, yeah, that's really good. That's the sort of work Fiona does. And I should be able to look at it and go, that is good, or it's not so good, regardless of who has done it. And I think forms can really help with that as well. It can help us look at it in a very data sort of driven view, a very diagnostic view, and that can help to take away some of those wee bits of bias. And sometimes as well, best will in the world, you've done all the questioning with your learners, you've had all that chat at the start, they've paired thought, they've put notes down, you've asked them some really good challenging questions, they've answered it, you think, yes, they understand this. Off you go to your independent learning, and the hand goes up and says, I'm stuck. So there's always going to be an element of that. And I think as well, we can look at that and go, yep, my class understand what I've asked them to do. I'm looking at it, they're all focused, they're all heads down, but they might just be writing something that is not accurate or correct or representative. They might have lots of misunderstandings or that in there. So again, we can look at a class and say, oh, they look like they're on task, they look like they're on target. But I think, again, with forms, you can use that to cut through some of that. So spoken about, again, the bias and the inferences from assessment. So I'm going to show you an example one here. So this is what my learners would see. Let me go back and edit that. This is what my learner would see. So here's a quiz for some younger learners. And again, you'll see, I spoke about Immersive Reader, that's built in as well. So Immersive Reader will read the quiz to them. So again, it can help promote engagement because it's more accessible to more of my learners. So they can have any part of the screen read to them. You can see again at the question point. So it won't read the instructions, which is a wee bit frustrating. However, I'm using Microsoft, the Edge browser, which has got read aloud built in. So if I go up to the ellipsis, it's got read aloud and I can read any part of the page. So even if I didn't have Immersive Reader, the web browser will deal with that. Mobile devices have got that built in as well. What animal is this? They've got a picture. I'm hoping they can recognise, again I'm aiming at younger children, probably primary 2 here. I'm hoping they can recognise that on the screen. If I ask it to read it, again, what animal is it? And it will read the options as well. So I'm hoping that when they hear cow red,
Cow.
great, that's what I thought it was. And even the pictures match up. I can use different tools like this. Lets me do a wee sort of table thing. So what do I get from each animal? Let's go milk and eggs and eggs. I submit that. Now as a learner, how's that? Instant feedback. So for this question, I got that correct. It is a cow, and I've asked them as well what noise that make. This one, it won't self-mark just for the type of question. So there are limitations. There's loads of different question types you can do in forms. There's limitations to the amount of sort of feedback you can provide them. But if you do multiple choice, it's great for giving them instant feedback. You assign a correct answer when you make the form here. So I've put in, that's the question. I can add an image to it. I can add a video link as well. Here's one of my answers. So I can just add a new option. Let's do a llama, and I can attach feedback to that. And I think the feedback is particularly useful if they've got it wrong. So not quite. Have a look at the colours. What do you notice about this pattern? Did we speak about animals with that pattern? Or you can even put a video link, etc. in there. There's loads. We've done loads of input from our team around forms. I'm not going to get too much detail about this, but the beauty is, as I say, I can assign a correct answer to multiple choice questions. So if my learner puts in the correct answer, they can get instant feedback. And again, Dylan William talks about the shorter that feedback cycle, that loop, then the more impact it has in learners. So if they get feedback as soon as they've finished it, then they're more likely to go and, if you say to them, go and have a look at this video which explains what a cow is, they're more likely to do that at the time than a week later. As an educator, you can look at it here, you go into responses, I can see here it's taken, as I go through it, you should give me a bit of feedback here, tell me how long it took on average to complete it, and that can tell me if it's taken half an hour to finish a 10 question quiz, that might be a wee bit too hard. Most of my class can identify a cow, that's great, 2 of them can't. So what I can do is have a look here as well and see that was George. George thinks it's a sheep. I need to go and speak to the 2 boys called George because they've put it in as a sheep. I can focus my time on them. I don't have to go through everybody else. I don't have to go through George and Christina and Sarah's copies and tick them just to tell them they're correct. The form will do that for me, but I can focus on the misconceptions and fixing them. And again, quite a bit of a spread here. Most people think chicken, that's great. A few people saying chickens produce wool. I want to again dip into that and see who said wool for a chicken. So let's go and find those learners. And again, that's looking at the questions. What I can do is I can review the answers for each learner. So I can go through Christina's and have a look and see, yep, that's looking good, Christina, and I can give her feedback. Well done, that's correct. Or I could say, what do you mean chickens have wool, if that was the answer that she'd put. So I can give her specific feedback as well as the automatically generated feedback. So for me, forms is well worth your time to have a look at that for diagnostic sort of examples. And I've put some other examples in you can have a look at for forms. even down to kind of doing it as a knowledge gathering, so a kind of KWL activity, and I'm asking them to go and watch a video and then tell me what they learned from the video. So I've given everybody a bit of base knowledge and I can move on from that. I'm well aware we're coming up to time, so I want to jump past that. So a bit about forms and assessment. I'd say forms and OneNote are definitely our friends. I don't see any comments in the chat here, so what I want to do is just with time in mind, again, there's lots of links all the way through here for you to have a look. You can add your own QR code to your browser to do that. I've put lots of videos here from our team that you'll find on the Digitally Scott site. If you've not been to Digitally Scott, well worth having a look here, particularly under learning paths. This is going under a wee bit of a makeover, so it's a wee bit jumbled at the moment. The learning online, you want to talk about dual coding your presentations, videos to make them as clear as possible. If you're talking about bananas, put a picture of a banana in the screen when you're talking about bananas. Don't put a picture of a fruit bowl that might have bananas and apples and grapes, because that will confuse the message to the learner. Don't put a picture of a smiley face or a wee dog with false teeth in. It's something that's going to make your learner smile and it's nice. If it doesn't relate to the information you're talking about, don't include it. So that's stuff we can all learn about dual coding. Again, stuff about diagnostic questioning my colleague Brian's put together. For leaders, anyone's a head teacher or senior management on here, well worth having a look at this section, some schools and their examples of how they've used digital technology going forward. That will come into the next step we're going to talk about in the last 5 minutes. And independent learning, it's a new section we've put in, well worth having a look. It's a real focus on metacognition. You might have seen my colleague Louise present about this the other week. There's her slides, and then she split it up into 3 bite-sized videos that you can look at to ensure that our learners are becoming more independent. But a key part of that we need is effective assessment. We need assessment to tell them what they've done well, what they need to improve on. The last wee bit then, and I hope we get to discussion, we haven't. I've went on far too long about assignments and OneNote, but hopefully that's been really useful to you. I want a couple of challenge questions here. So if you want to, you can scan that Jamboard, scan the QR code, or I'm going to share the link into the chat. You can click on it there. It'd be great if you want to pop any messages up really quickly on the Jamboard. It will hopefully open up for you. And you can use the post-it notes over on the left-hand side here. Just tell us a wee bit what has been effective, what's worked well for your learners, what has engaged them, what's been good, and how have you done any assessment? Has your assessment been going well? Have you used forms? Have you used OneNote? Have you used another tool for that? And there's a few pages to go through, and it might be useful even for Fiona and some of the other regional leads to have, if people can fill some of this in if they get a moment. I know we are running out of time in the session, but I'd love to know, how are you going to take that forward then? So whatever has worked well for you, how are you going to keep that going? So forms has engaged your learners. Is that something you're going to consider for homework, for learning at home? Is that something you're going to take forward because it's worked? Has something been better about your assessment? Are you finding that OneNote just gives you a broader range of assessment and that's far more effective for making judgments and for feeding back to learners? How are you going to take, is that something you're going to keep using in your class? Around homework, pardon me, a couple of points from the double EF here, again about what homework should be. Research shows that homework has a bigger impact in secondary than it does in primary, but how can you make it even more impactful, even more effective? And again, if you're using OneNote in the classroom, are learners using that then at home? Are they adding to that page? Are they building a PowerPoint based on what you did in the class? Or are they doing 10 spelling words that you gave them on Monday, they're writing it in a jotter and you mark it on Friday? Is it that kind of classic, which again I was guilty of doing early in my career? Or are you doing a PowerPoint presentation based on something they started in the class, they're building upon it at home, and then on Friday they're presenting that for the listening and talking E's and O's in the class? But it was something you did in the class, something they developed at home, and they're using those digital tools to keep that going. Massive increase in online harm to children and young people over the past year, absolutely astronomical figures, because they're spending more time online, and the people who want to do harm to our children and young people are spending more time online. They are not going to their work, their jobs, their offices. They're sitting at home on computers, whether that's furlough or they're still working from home. But guess what? When you're sitting in a room by yourself and you've not got somebody else sitting beside you in a team, you can look at whatever you like on the internet, and unfortunately we're seeing that's having a huge negative impact on our children and young people. So I'm going to urge you, if it's not already a part of your school improvement plan going forward, I'd love to support you with your cyber resilience and internet safety learning, and make sure that we make that as effective and have as much coverage and as much impact as possible, because this year has had a huge negative toll on our children and young people, and that's from digital wellbeing, being stuck at a screen, to people taking advantage and exploiting them, and that's having a huge impact. So that's something I think we've all across the whole country, probably across the whole world, been in a similar boat, and I'd love to support anyone that wants any support around that. So there's our 3 key parts for passwords, 3 random words: cyber resilience, recognise, react and recover to threats to their device, and internet safety. They should be safe, smart and kind to themselves and others. Thinking about curriculum development then, as we return to bricks and mortar, there's probably more scope to make sure that we cover all the areas of curriculum we may have found it difficult to do remotely. But I would ask you this as well. You have probably upskilled yourself massively on your digital literacy. Your learners will certainly have come to the fore using Teams and Classroom and all these apps and platforms all the time, daily. How are you going to make school match the best parts of their online experience? So there's been ups and downs for them, but there's bits that have definitely been positive. Digital literacy development is great. How are you going to carry that forward and develop that in your school? How are you going to make sure that there is progression and they're not still doing the same activities just now in a year's time? How are you going to make sure that you have developed that and progressed their challenge and opportunities there? And particularly for primary practitioners, I'd say real focus about that computing science and cyber resilience and internet safety across the curriculum. If you are a secondary practitioner and you happen to be a computing science teacher, I'm going to guess if you're in the southwest, you're probably already a member of ADICOS. So again, happy to support groups or curricular areas. So again, if you're a group of history teachers and you want some support to think how does develop digital literacy, or indeed computing science and cyber resilience and internet safety fit into history or geography, get in touch, and happy to support that. But I definitely would challenge you. Digital literacy is there to see for everybody, so how do you make sure that's embedded in your curriculum? If you want to do any development work for that, get in touch, either directly myself at ICT Crowd on Twitter or through DigiLearn Scott, or I'm sure Fiona or your local authority leads will point you in the right direction. If you are taking that development forward in your school, well worth considering doing the Digital Schools Award evaluation framework as you go, because it will point out where you are and where you need to improve. And that can be great to just, again, that bit about having the critical friend. If you think you're doing things great, Digital Schools Award, you put it into the framework and it will tell you where you are, if you need to develop that further, or if it's lacking evidence, etc. Or if it is really good, and then again, once you've met the criteria, you get the lovely shiny plaque that Mary Todd there is holding and modelling for us. So Digital Schools Award, definitely something to consider as you do your school improvement plans and make the next steps. We'd love to hear about those. So how have you developed this year? Please do share it DigiLearn Scott, and there's a section on our website for that. It's worth having a look at and seeing other people's stories. About 100 stories now of how people have developed their digital learning and teaching this past year. But thank you very much for joining. I hope that's proved useful to you.